You know that feeling, right? You get on a plane and it feels like the seats are getting smaller every single time. Well, that feeling of being squeezed in, it's actually about a lot more than just comfort. We're talking about a potential safety crisis that's hiding in plain sight. So let's get into it. And really, it all boils down to this one question. I mean, who doesn't love a good deal on a flight? But are we, without even realizing it, trading away some really fundamental safety standards just to get a cheaper ticket? Okay, so what we're going to do in this explainer is look at how this industry-wide push to cram more seats on the planes is messing with two very specific and, frankly, life-or-death safety procedures. We're talking about the brace position and that pre-flight safety demo. All right, so how did we get to this point? Well, you probably won't be surprised to hear it all comes down to a pretty simple business strategy, making as much money as possible. Let's take a look at how they're actually redoing the inside of these planes to make it happen. The playbook here is actually pretty straightforward, especially on those planes most of us fly on, like the A320neo and the 737 MAX. First thing they do is reduce what's called seat pitch. That's basically just the distance from your headrest to the one in front of you. Then they often rip out those bulky in-flight entertainment screens. And what's the result? Boom, just enough space to squeeze in a few extra rows of seats. It's great for the airline's bank account for sure, but it's creating a really dangerous trade-off for us, the passengers. Okay, let's tackle the first big problem here. You know, in an emergency landing, they tell you the single most important thing you can do to protect yourself is get into the brace position. But what happens if you physically can't?
And this is where you see the huge disconnect between theory and reality. The little safety card tells you to bend way forward and protect your head. Simple enough, right? But for so many people, especially anyone who's a bit taller, the seat in front of them is so close, it's basically a wall. It makes it literally impossible to get into that correct, life-saving position.
You know, the source material we're looking at puts it perfectly. It says that for more and more passengers, the instruction to brace for impact has become, quote, an impossible command. And think about that for a second. A safety procedure you can't actually do? That's not a safety procedure at all. Okay, so that's the first major problem. The second one is, honestly, just as worrying. Because even if you could get into the brace position, you first have to know how to do it, right? But the thing is, for a huge number of passengers, that critical information is literally out of sight. Think about it. On a lot of these budget flights, those seatback screens are just gone. So now you're relying on the cabin crew doing the demonstration in the aisle. But if you're stuck in a window or a middle seat, your view is almost always completely blocked by heads and seats. You might catch a glimpse of an arm holding a life vest, but you're missing all the crucial details: how to use the oxygen mask, where the nearest exit is. That information, that life-saving information, simply isn't getting to you. So all of this leads to a massive question, right? If these cramped cabins are creating such obvious safety problems, how on earth are they getting approved? Why are the big international aviation authorities, the groups like IATA and ICAO that set the rules for the whole world, signing off on this? Well, the answer, it turns out, is a seriously flawed testing process. See, the so-called gold standard for getting a cabin certified is something called the 90-second evacuation test. And on paper, it sounds pretty good. An airline has to prove that they can get every single person off a full plane in 90 seconds or less, a minute and a half. The problem isn't the time limit, it's the conditions under which they run that test. Just look at this comparison. It's just a massive disconnect from reality. The official test, they use calm, able-bodied volunteers who know what's coming. The aisles are totally clear. Now, a real emergency, you've got people of all ages, different physical abilities, and everyone is panicking. The cabin could be filled with smoke, with luggage blocking the aisles. The gap between the test and a real-world disaster is just huge, and it gets wider and more dangerous with every single extra seat they manage to cram onto a plane. Okay, so we've laid out a pretty serious problem here, but it's not all doom and gloom. It's not hopeless. The source material actually proposes a really clear three-step plan to get safety standards back to where they need to be to match the reality of flying today. It's pretty straightforward, really. First, regulators have to set a minimum seat pitch, one that actually lets every single passenger, regardless of their height, get into the brace position. Second, make visual safety aids, like overhead screens, mandatory on all flights so everyone can see the demo. And third, completely overhaul that evacuation test so it reflects real-world conditions with different types of passengers and fake obstacles. I mean, these are just common sense changes, right? But they would make a world of difference. And this quote, I think, just cuts right to the heart of it all. Of course we all want affordable flights. That's a great thing. But it should never,
ever come at the cost of safety standards that should be non-negotiable. The amazing safety record the airline industry has was built on intense discipline and procedure, not on cutting corners to squeeze out a little more profit.
So that leaves us with one final, really critical question. Whose job is it to fix this? Is it up to the regulators to step in and enforce tougher rules? Or should the airlines themselves take some responsibility for the safety of the people who buy their tickets? This isn't just some abstract debate for the aviation industry. This is for every single one of us who gets on a plane. The time to close this safety gap is right now, before a tragedy forces everyone's hand.